Okay, so I'm an atheist, and by that I mean I don't believe in gods to the extent that they are described in any religion that I'm aware of. I'm obviously open to the idea that there are forces beyond human comprehension. That's almost certainly true. And that in of itself is the whole conversation. There are so many ways to define God, and maybe we can talk about that one day. But I don't believe in God. That's the gist of what I'm saying. But I wasn't always an atheist. I grew up in the southern United States, which, the Bible Belt, it's literally in the name. And, I'm black, obviously. And so Southern and black, there's a very strong Christian tradition in that community. And so that's what I was brought up in. And I was fully into it for a long time. And also, and this is kind of something that I think kind of backfired for my parents. I don't think they were intending for this to happen, but I was also kind of brought up to be a very curious person. I was brought up to be interested in learning things. My mom always had books in the house. So I was always just interested in learning and knowledge, being rational, things like that. And the first way that I applied this to my life is, well, I've been brought up in this Christian community and been taught all these things about God and Jesus and Christianity. So for me, as a person who wants to be knowledgeable and who wants things to make sense and who wants to learn and make sure that I'm learning the correct things, I wanted to see if I could sort of rationally and logically prove the ideas of Christianity that I was being taught. It's, Christian apologetics is what it's called. And I was into that for quite a while. It's if you don't know, Christian apology is like a whole field. There's like a lot of people that do that. But for me, what I found, and I'm just a guy, I'm not the smartest person in the world. Maybe I took a wrong turn at some point, but what I found is that the more you do it and the more that you're challenged, and the more you're challenged by very serious and smart arguments, the harder it is to logically and rationally defend Christianity. And just over time, it just occurred to me that I was jumping through too many hoops. I was doing too much mental gymnastics to justify my beliefs. I was, begging the question, committing logical fallacies here and there. And I just realized, like, maybe this is not defensible. Maybe logic and rationality actually can't defend Christianity. And that, on top of some other things, eventually led to me leaving Christianity and losing my religion, until the point that I became a pretty serious atheist. And I was one of those like obnoxious, militant atheists. I think I was maybe sort of like lashing out at the fact that Christianity had taken up so much of my energy and time, only to find out that it's probably not true. And so I was like, I don't want anybody else to go through that. So I'm going to devote so much attention to checking and ridiculing and criticizing Christianity and religion. And I came up during the time of the new atheist movement. A lot of you might be familiar with that, the anti-theist movement. And there's a concept in sort of the skeptic atheist world that you may have heard of called woo or woo-woo, where they kind of attack like pseudoscientific or like new agey ideas, things like homeopathy or the law of attraction, just sort of these ideas that aren't really like supported by any scientific or logical evidence, that people just believe because they sound good. And that's like a big thing that was often attacked. There was like certain people who were like accused of being woo peddlers. I know Deepak Chopra is one of those guys that was attacked often by the new atheists. A lot of these people were accused of being grifters. Like they were just saying things that just sounded a little too good to be true, just to, sell books or whatever. And I think I kind of always lumped in the idea of spirituality into that sort of new agey category where, people are imagining like energies and spirits like literally flowing through the world that we can somehow tap into. And of course, as a skeptic slash atheist slash whatever, I'm like, well, there's no evidence that that's happening, so why should I believe that? But there was one thing that kind of planted a seed in my mind, because one of those new atheist guys was this guy Sam Harris, who you probably have heard of. And there's a lot that people can say about Sam Harris. I don't really want to get into that, but Sam Harris was a guy that talked about spirituality, and he was like in favor of spirituality. And I think he wrote a book about it and everything. I didn't read the book, so I didn't exactly know his ideas about it. But at the time, Sam Harris was a guy that I really admired. So I always thought it was strange that he was into spirituality because I always lumped it in with a sort of new agey pseudosciencey stuff. And, I didn't really put too much stock into it, but that is just something that I kept in mind. And for a lot of people, including myself, this sort of skepticism, the atheism, but especially the skeptical part kind of lended itself to politics. And this was around the time when sort of politics became pop culture. Like, it was hard to do anything without politics being infused in it. And especially someone like me, who is a content creator who's online. I was heavily involved in the sort of political culture wars on YouTube, as many of you know. And so as this sort of person who wanted to be rational and logical and fair and, not aligned with bullshit, evidence-based, that sort of thing, I had this strong desire to make sure that I was right about stuff. And I think, in hindsight, that's not that bad of an idea. Like, you don't want to go on YouTube or in your personal conversations, just say nonsense or just make up stuff. So you want to make sure that your opinions are supported by truth and facts. And I think that resulted in me being more inquisitive. I researched a lot of stuff. I listened to a lot of different opinions about different things. And I still have that inquisitiveness. I like learning the answers to questions. Like, I think that's really cool. It's an enriching activity. But the desire to be right, I think, has a lot of problems. And this is what I started to learn over time. First of all, there's a difference between wanting to be right and wanting to learn stuff. And if you are more focused on being right than learning stuff, sometimes you can find yourself just becoming satisfied with the first answer that you receive that sounds right to you or that confirms your pre-existing biases. And this can be very dangerous because the first answer you receive may not be the best answer. And if you've gotten that first answer and you've just assumed that that's the best answer, you might close yourself off to any future evidence or any future answers that you might receive. Like, for example, something that I used to do a lot is like, I would have an idea that I thought was probably right, usually some kind of political idea or some social justice idea. And then I would go on the internet and see if I could find a research study or something like that would support the idea that I had. So it's like, I had a hypothesis and I wanted to see if it was true. And oftentimes I would find something that supported that. And I was like, okay, I guess I was right. But in reality, one research paper is almost never enough to like totally convincingly prove that anything is true. You need a body of evidence to establish a long-standing trend over many, many years to even come close to acknowledging some kind of statistic or some kind of idea as probably true. And even at the end, it's only probably true. There are so many factors and variables involved in things. But because I was more obsessed with being right and being correct, I was satisfied with just the one thing that confirmed the thing that I wanted to be true, basically. But even beyond that, if you're like paying attention, the more that you meet people, the more experiences you have, the more you just look out into the world, you realize that human beings are like rarely 100% right about anything. We are all so biased and emotional and impulsive. Almost every opinion that we believe to be true is tarnished by our biases and our personal experiences. Like, it is very hard to find someone who is 100% right about anything. So it's like the pursuit of that is kind of an inherently losing battle. We are all figuring out this life as we go on, and we will all die before we even come close to figuring out all of it. I'm not sure that human beings are built for the pursuit of being correct. Like, our brains aren't wired for that. It makes much more sense to just assume that your perspective is always limited, because it is. You only have the perspective of one person, and that's just not enough to really know anything for sure. And even this thing that I'm saying right now, I could be wrong about this. But that's kind of where my mind was heading around this time. And as a person who's kind of involved in the political conversation online and the culture wars, as they call them, there was a little tension, because you want to be perceived as enlightened. You want to be perceived as smart. You want to be perceived as knowing what you're talking about. You want to feel like you're making good points. And that's hard to do if your baseline is, well, I could be wrong. Like, I'm saying this with confidence, but I could definitely be wrong. My perspective is limited. You can't really say that. It's less convincing And that's one of the reasons why I stopped making political content on YouTube, because I didn't like the idea of being perceived as a guy who you should listen to and who you should base your ideas off of. Because I'm just a dude. We're all just a dude. We all have our own singular perspective that is inherently limited and inherently tarnished by bias and emotion. But the thing is, like, I still wanted to be like informed about the world. I still wanted to try to do what I can to make the world a better place, but I didn't really know where to go, like what to do. And obviously politics and political discussions in general are very chaotic and very stressful. And that just, it wasn't like fulfilling. It didn't make me happy. And so that was just kind of like what propelled me to the next part of this story is I just wanted to find a way to feel happiness and feel at peace, and sort of like struggling to solve these super complex societal and political questions did not do that. But, you know, the idea that I personally had to do that was wrong-headed to begin with, but that's kind of another story. And I think that's where a lot of people get messed up, is we think that we have to solve these problems ourselves. And I think the only way that we solve these problems is if we do it all together. But instead, what we're doing is just individuals sort of yelling at each other, saying, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm right, my perspective is right, yours is wrong. And it's like, it just seemed completely wrong-headed. It was just stressing me out. So I started to move towards trying to figure out how to be happy in life, because this wasn't doing it. And I realized that part of what I felt like would make me happy is just becoming the best version of myself. I wanted to grow as a person. I wanted to become more thoughtful. I wanted to become more kind. I wanted to be less judgmental. And I was just thinking about things like that. I wanted to be more disciplined. I wanted to work harder. I wanted a better work ethic. You know, I felt like if I could become a better person, that would bring more peace in my life, and I would become more patient with people, and that would help me figure out, you know, my place in the world. So I think the first way that I looked at that is, well, I'm going to disassociate myself from things that don't make me happy. And that kind of works. Like, obviously, if you're in toxic situations, if you're doing something that you don't have to do that's making you unhappy, then don't do it anymore, you know? Like, for example, I got off Twitter because every time I got on Twitter, I was just upset and angry, and it never made me happy. It like pretty much never resulted in a positive experience. So I stopped going on Twitter, and I fully support that decision. But I don't think that works for everything in life. You can't just avoid things that make you unhappy. Sometimes things that make you unhappy are impossible to avoid just because of the nature of life. But also sometimes it might be useful to expose yourself to something that doesn't make you happy, or at least not intentionally expose yourself, but allow yourself to experience it, if that makes any sense. I'll explain better. I'm a competitive person. I love games. I love sports. I love the idea of competing against other people. I like improving skills. You know, I play a lot of video games. I used to play Smash Brothers competitively. Like, I used to go to tournaments and stuff. Like, I love the idea of like honing your skills and, you know, becoming a master at something. I play chess every day. I just like that. And so if you're involved in almost any competitive thing, one thing that you have to realize is you can't just play the game and expect to get better. Obviously you have to practice, but it's not just practice. You have to practice, and then you have to implement the things that you practice. And usually the first few times you try to implement the things that you practice, you're going to be terrible at it, and you're going to fail, and you're going to be bad. And so a common thing that you hear, like, for example, when I used to play Smash, a common advice that you would get from higher level players is they would say, when you play, don't play to win, play to learn. And which basically means you're allowing yourself to make mistakes so you can learn from them. You're not judging yourself if you make mistakes. You're not like playing super patiently and, you know, turtling so that you don't fail. Like, some people say, like, don't play not to lose, because you don't learn. Try things, you know, be bold, take risks. And that's how you get good at stuff, is you have to allow yourself to make mistakes so you can learn from them. And as a person who plays a lot of competitive games, I started to internalize that. And because of that, like, I've gotten a lot better at learning how to do stuff, because I allow myself to be bad at it at first so I can learn from the mistakes. So I started to think, like, well, this works so well when I'm playing games and other things like that. Can I apply this to life in general? So I started to look for opportunities to open myself up to embrace challenges in life and allow myself to make mistakes and allow myself to experience failure so that I could learn from it. For example, I something that I have been trying to do in my life is be more friendly and neighborly. Like, I'm one of those people that I don't know any of my neighbors because I never talk to people. I just kind of just go about my day with my head down and I don't talk to people. And I don't really like that. I would like to be more friendly and neighborly. So I told myself I was going to start making eye contact with people, start saying hello to people, try to give more substantive answers when people ask me questions, things like that. And a lot of times I'm not very good at it. I say something super awkward, or I don't look them in the eye, or when I look at them, they're looking down. They say something like, enjoy your meal, and you say, you too, even though they're at work and you're the one eating. It doesn't always work. It's often quite awkward. But every time I think I'm getting a little bit better at it. I still haven't mastered it, but I'm using those awkward moments as a opportunity to learn, like, okay, maybe I could have said this, maybe my tone of voice was a little better, maybe I should have spoke a little louder, maybe I should have smiled. I don't know. You don't know until you try it. And that's just kind of I wanted to give a sort of low stakes example, but you could do things like that in life. And I started to think that one of the ways that this is applied in life is becoming not comfortable, but becoming okay with experiencing negative emotions, like that awkwardness, like embarrassment. And this could be extrapolated to other emotions like anxiety, sadness, boredom, anger. I thought, what if instead of, trying my best to avoid situations that cause me to feel these emotions, what if I allow myself to experience these emotions? And I'm not saying be consumed by them, but just notice them and figure out what I can learn from them. Like, what did I do that caused this emotion, and what could I do different next time that would result in a better outcome? And just like, playing Smash Bros or playing chess or whatever is just a thing that you practice and get a little bit better at every time. So it turns out that this idea is a core idea in many spiritual practices. I didn't really know that. And until I, sort of looked more into it, because I was looking for advice and ideas about how I could get better at these things. And it turns out like this is just like a basic thing that is covered in a lot of, spirituality type of stuff. It's this sort of awareness of yourself, this noticing of your emotions, and realizing that noticing your emotions is an opportunity to learn from them. It's almost like a separation of yourself. Maybe you have heard of the idea of like parts, where you realize that there are parts of yourself doing different things, and you can notice like, oh, this part of me is sad. What can I learn from it? How much do I need to act on it, etc. This is essentially a part of the process that you may have heard of called dissolving your ego, which is something that is talked about in a lot of spiritual practices. And I kind of hesitate to say that because I feel like the idea of dissolving the ego sends the wrong message. And maybe like hardcore monks have figured out how to completely separate themselves from their desires and wants and whatever. I feel like that's probably untenable for the average person. But I honestly think of it similar to what I was talking about before with the research paper. So I think the default state, like what most people do, is they have an emotion and then their reaction to it is one of a few things. They immediately perceive that emotion as reality. They immediately obey it. Like you feel angry and you say, well, I'm angry. I'm in this moment. I'm an angry person and I will react to everything as an angry person would. Or they have an emotion and they try to fight it. They feel anxious or upset. And so they try to distract themselves, or they try to like self-medicate or whatever. But what I've been thinking about lately is treating it like that research paper. It's a data point. When you feel an emotion, it is just a data point. It gives you information about what you can do next. So if you feel angry or if you feel anxious, you can notice that. You don't dive into it and let it consume you. You notice it and you think about, okay, well, why do I feel this way? And what should I do next? What makes the most sense going forward? And you just use it as one data point, and you compare it to other things that are happening around you. You can compare it to the circumstances. You can compare it to what your brain is telling you. How do you logically feel? You can compare it to what other people might do or what other people say. It's all a bunch of data points that you bring together. The problem is we get so focused in our emotions, we think that that's the full story. And I just don't think it is. It usually isn't. And I don't know, that's kind of how I see this idea of separating yourself from your ego. But I'm not an expert. I'm just trying to like find ways to think about these things. But the main point is that I kind of like stumbled into this idea that, people in various philosophical and spiritual practices have been talking about for like millennia. And this is like getting close to the kind of thing that I would have called woo back in the day. Like this is like maybe some new agey bullshit. But what I realize is like this doesn't really require me to posit the existence of like spirits or energies or karma or anything like that. Like none of that needs to exist. All you're doing is just paying attention to yourself. And things like meditation can help. And meditation is like a science, evidence-based activity that science has proved is helpful to people. But this doesn't even require meditation either. It just requires you to allow yourself to experience your emotions and decide whether those emotions are reality, which they often aren't. They are just your body reacting to a stimulus. And it turns out, and I've experienced this to some extent, I have a long way to go, but it turns out when you get better at paying attention to yourself and not judging yourself and allowing yourself to experience things, you get a lot better at showing that same grace for other people. You're way more understanding of people, way more loving of people. And this aligns with the type of person that I personally would like to be. And, you know, maybe that's what people mean, or that at least part of what people mean when they say that, you know, we're all connected, we're all one consciousness, that sort of thing. Like, I don't even really like the term spiritual because I feel like I don't have to posit a spiritual realm. I don't have to think about spirits, but that's the word that people use to describe this idea of discovering your true self or discovering meaning and purpose, you know, in your life and just in the world and human connection and things like that. That's the word people use, but you know, that said, I've started to really think about it, and I've started to realize that this is basically the sort of general idea that most religions and most spiritual and philosophical practices are like getting at, you know, everything from Christianity to Islam to Buddhism to Hinduism to Stoicism to nihilism. They're just all different ways of trying to contextualize the idea that the thoughts and emotions that we have are not really the thing that is important. They are just things that we get to experience and we get to be aware of, and we get to decide how and whether we should act on them. Like if I'm driving and someone cuts me off in traffic, I could get like super pissed off and angry at them. It could ruin my whole day. In fact, I've been in situations where that's happened, where someone was a dick to me on the road and it just ruined my whole day. I could also try to ignore the anger. You know, I'm fired up, so I like turn the radio up and, you know, just try to drown out this negative emotion with my favorite song or something like that. Or I could simply notice that I am angry and be aware of it with no judgment. It's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's just a thing that I'm experiencing, and just notice it and perhaps think about why I'm angry and whether it makes sense to hold on to that anger, which usually it doesn't. And it's hard to do if you're out of practice. And I'm not saying that I'm even an expert at it. I think I have an advantage because I'm generally more of a calm and chill person. I mean, I have emotions, obviously, but it's a thing you have to practice for sure. I think the problem is a lot of people they identify themselves with those emotions. Like I know people that will willingly tell you, yeah, I get road rage sometimes. That's just who I am. People identify themselves with those negative emotions, even though they're not pleasant. They don't make your life better, but it's like ingrained into our identities, and it's really hard to give up your identity, what you perceive to be your identity. And also there's like this sense of sort of justice. Like if someone wrongs you, you feel like something must be done about it. And if nothing is going to be done about it, at least you get to have some negativity about it. I guess at least you get to be mad about it. And if that's, you know, if you like being like that, that's cool. But just for me, that's not the type of person that I want it to be. But yeah, it takes practice. That's why these are called like spiritual practices or whatever. And I am by no means this like super enlightened person. I'm like in the very beginning phases of this, but this is just something that has really opened my mind lately and I've been really into. And I just feel like it is leading me towards the type of person that I really would like to be. And it's just kind of crazy to think about because I never would have thought that I would have ever been here. And you know, who knows, maybe my next video in a few months will be like, never mind, that was all bullshit. But for now, like it makes a lot of sense to me, and it's really wild to think about. You know, I'm like watching videos about like yoga-based meditations and like Hindu philosophy and things, and it's like this is stuff that I absolutely never would have even considered back in my new atheist days. I'm even experiencing a lot more grace towards religions like Christianity and Islam, because I feel like I get the gist of what they're going for. I think there's still a lot of problems with organized religion, especially the way that it's carried out in practice. But that sort of general, sort of spiritual idea of realizing sort of a separation between whatever you consider your true self to be. Like, there's different words for it in sort of Abrahamic religions. They might call it the soul or the spirit. And again, I don't think you have to believe in like a literal, metaphysical spiritual realm where there's another part of you existing somewhere. It's just a part of your mind. But just the idea that there's a separation between one part of you and the part of you that wants things, that experiences emotions and things like that. And that those two parts they don't always have to be on the same page. Like I said, I'm still in like the learning process, but I just thought it was an interesting story because anyone who knows me would probably be surprised that I've kind of gone down this path. But, I don't know, man, I might just be getting old, but I'm just at a point in life where I just want peace and I want to be just a more caring and more loving person. And I feel like in order to do that, I need to learn how to stop judging myself and learn more emotional control and just learn to be just figure out who I am. So yeah, that's it. I hope that was interesting. I'm curious if you have any thoughts. Maybe all of that sounded like bullshit. I'm sure it sounded like bullshit to some people, but that's kind of where I'm at. Let me know what you think. Bye-bye.